What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Apex Podcast, live stream style, right here in Canton, Ohio, live from the incubation headquarters, right across the street from Centennial Plaza, right next door to Arcadia Grill, all of the amazing things right here in Canton. So today, this is a interview that I have had on the books for months, y'all. Months and months and months. I saw a TED Talk a little while ago, and I was watching it, and it kind of started off like most TED Talks do, a little bit of a story and a background, kind of an intense hook, everything else like that. But the more I watched it, the more I was like, holy shit. I was like, I feel where this guy's coming from. You know what I mean? And the more that I listened to the one video, and then next thing I knew, I went to his YouTube channel. I listened to an entire playlist, and you know how that goes. The rabbit hole expands, and then holy crap, 4 hours have gone by, and now you don't know where you're going to get that portion of your life back. But the nice thing is that if you waste, quote unquote, those 4 hours looking up stuff like that, it's not actually wasted. All right. And I'm super, super excited to have the author of the book, Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts, Mr. Michael Brody-Waite, here on the show with us today. Let me bring him up in the stream. Welcome. How's it going?
Dude, well, it just got better because you said you weren't wasting 4 hours watching my content, so that felt good.
Heck yeah, man. No, dude, like I was going back through and I was looking through a whole bunch of them, right? And my biggest thing with people, because I do brand strategy, right? You have to be transparent. Like, people are not stupid. If they watch your shit and you are being anything other than blatantly authentic, they're going to be like, hold up. Something's not right, and before we really dive into your whole storyline, I'm going to focus on that point for just a second, because there's something that you said in one of your clips on YouTube that I think people really need to understand. And it was, you were talking about a friend calling you out on recording all of your stuff and saying that you were trying to be Michael Brody-Waite, not just being Michael Brody-Waite. So why don't we just start off talking about what that means?
Yeah, so my whole life is about being as authentic as possible, and not just like being selectively authentic or having curated authenticity, but practicing rigorous authenticity. And so I put out a lot of content encouraging people to be authentic, and I'm sitting there and I'm making this content, and that friend was actually my wife. She knows me really well. And she's recording, and she's like, stop. And I'm like, what? She's like, you're not being yourself. You're trying to be what you think people want Michael Brody-Waite to be. And I was like, well, okay. So I was like, wanting to get argumentative, right? I'm like, I don't agree, because I agree with all the things I'm saying. I'm being authentic. I'm being vulnerable. Right. And she's like, yes, but I can tell the difference between when you were talking to everybody and when you were talking to one person.
Wow.
And when you were talking to everybody, you were performing. And I've seen you in your life way before we started doing this content stuff. When you are talking to another recovering addict or another leader, you dig in and you're not as animated. You're not saying all that, your hands aren't going everywhere. You're not being as intense.
Yep.
And she was just like, you're trying to be Michael Brody-Waite instead of actually just being Michael Brody-Waite. And I'm really lucky that my recovery taught me to recognize the truth when I see it. And she was right. And I also had a really interesting moment. Like the next time we were doing content, she called me out again, and it's something that we keep working on, because I don't want to do that, but it's really hard.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And that's something that I deal with all the time, right? Because and we'll dive into the meat and bones of what it actually means to be a mask-free CEO. But, as somebody that has taken a podcast from my mom's basement to, my spare bedroom of my college apartment, where we used like old floor mats to insulate the walls, to now sitting in an office in downtown that I pursued a grant for, and doing business with companies in California and New York and, all across the country as an ICU nurse. Like, that's what I graduated school for.
Yeah.
People look at me and they're like, dude, what the hell are you doing with your life? Like, pick something.
I saw that you were a nurse, and I was like, just because my background is, I worked in healthcare for a while, so I was like, thank you for being a nurse. But at the same time, I was like, that's very different than what you're doing right now. That's very, very different.
Yeah. And well, it's not as different as you think. So like the number one thing that they teach you in nursing school is empathy. I mean, you have to be able to empathize and sympathize with a patient, right? So what I did is we treat people's brands like they're living organisms. You know, when you walk into the room with a patient, you have 5 minutes or so to try to figure out how to tell that person that just got a 10-inch incision through their sternum to chill out and take some pills,
That
and
makes
relax.
sense though.
And then
'Cause you're
also
right.
dealing with the family members and all the other stuff. And you're dealing across the lifespan. So it's different when you're talking to a 27-year-old versus a 60-year-old versus a 40-year-old. They all have different priorities. They're in different places in life. And I was like, what if we applied that to marketing and we actually gave a crap about what people were thinking and then just reverse engineered like the messaging centered around what that person actually wants to hear. And then it just moved. It just blew up. It's like, wow, what a logical thought. And then people looking and they're like, wow, nursing and marketing is so different. I'm like, actually, it's basically just psych.
Yep.
Just in different avenues.
Yeah. So
I'm curious on this show, right? We started out the Apex podcast. Our overall principle, right, is the apex of my life is my death. And so that entire principle is that the highest given point of any path or object is an apex. So once you acknowledge that you've reached an apex, the only direction you have to go logically is down, because there is no rational point beyond an apex.
Yep.
So people tend to hit that peak, and we all know the 50-year-old that talks about the high school touchdown.
Yep.
And so that's where they hit that point and then they drop. Well, the principle is you hit that peak and then you're going to get punched in the face. And you're either going to go down, or you can learn to plateau, pull back, scan the horizon line, figure out where the next apex is, shoot for that one. And then the only time you should reach your true peak is when you're waving to St. Peter at the Pearlies.
Right.
Because at that point, you ain't got nothing left to prove.
Right.
Right. And so I'm curious, we always go back and we start in like high school, where you grew up, that type of stuff, to try to figure out, because in my county, we set the national record for high school age suicides in 2017. Damn. It was horrible. And there's just this massive black cloud of just sadness and misunderstanding and, stigmatism around mental health and all of this stuff that was happening. And I always try to stay true to that movement and take people back and remind them what it was like to be a high school student. So why don't we just start with, who you are, where you grew up, and what it was like for you going through school?
When I was 10 years old, we moved from Northern California, Los Altos Hills before Silicon Valley, and it was just gravel roads and ranches and pretty down to earth. We moved to Los Angeles. And that was a pretty significant shock to my system, because people were very materialistic and superficial. And I didn't like, the first question I got was, what does your dad do? And what does he drive? And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
What the hell? And I was like young for my grade. I was short for my grade. And my parents were they both had really challenging childhoods. So they were really overprotective. And so as a result, I walked around as this kid that just didn't know how to deal with life in life's terms, because I was insulated from challenges. I was very lucky to be insulated, but like my mom wouldn't let me play in the front yard of a friend's house in case I would get kidnapped. I was basically under like military or like the security.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it sounds like a military boarding academy.
So I didn't know how to deal with life in life's terms. I felt out of place where I lived. And so I was always uncomfortable in my skin. And then in high school, my parents sat me down and they said, okay, there's something that you need to understand. Your father is an alcoholic. When I was 6 months old, he came home. He's a lawyer. He would go to the bar. We'd get drunk every night. And when I was 6 months old, he came home one night, picked me up from my crib. And because he was so drunk, he dropped me. And he looked at himself in the mirror and he said, I can be an alcoholic or I can be a father, but I can't be both.
Wow. And
that's when he stopped drinking. Now, my dad, you'll appreciate this, good Midwestern guy from East Lansing, Michigan. So he knew how to put self-discipline and work ethic to not drinking, but he became what we call dry drunk and started getting funneled into other areas. And so my parents are telling me this, and they're like, so basically you have the genetics and the predisposition towards alcoholism or addiction. So don't use. Well, here I'm this kid in high school where everybody around me is experimenting and I'm a good kid.
Right.
I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. I'm seeing people get numb and high and excited. And I'm like,
Yep.
well, shit, dude, this sounds great to me. Like,
Yeah.
if you have a kid that you think could be an addict, don't tell them not to use, because then you'll just obsess over it. And so
Right.
I started trying to experiment. Within a year, I'd gotten drunk. I tried to sniff white out. I had smoked weed. I'd done.
And now what age was this? What age were you at this time?
16-ish.
16? Dude, our timelines are pretty much like lining up right on the money. I was about 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was, I didn't become an addict, but I definitely became someone who was experimenting. And then when I went to college, all hell broke loose. And I remember I had this blow up. I was a freshman. I was in the dorm. I was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and I got really upset about something. And there was no logic to it. People were like, "What the hell is your problem?" And so I left, and there was a bunch of beer in our fridge, and I started drinking it. And I remember thinking, when they passed out the instructions on how to deal with life, I was skipped. I don't know how to deal with this. And then the next day, or like a couple days later, we had TV on. Don't ask me why we were watching the Lifetime channel, a bunch of dudes in the freshman year of college. We're watching the Lifetime channel.
College is a weird time.
It is. And there's a story about this guy that's an alcoholic. And it's essentially a movie that's a warning of what happens if you become an alcoholic. And I watched him lose his entire family. And I actually, this doesn't even make sense today, but I look at that, I'm like, I'm going to beat that. I don't know how to do this thing called life, but I know I can do that well.
Right.
He's numb all the time. It's a really simple life. He's just trying to get what he needs in order to be able to stay drunk. He doesn't care about anything else. That looks appealing to me. And so I decided to try to become an addict. I actually made that my goal.
Wow. I've got it, out of all the stories that I've heard played out, I've yet to meet, and I've spent time as a CDCA, done all that stuff, that I have yet to hear somebody been like, I purposely decided that I was going to pursue this as like a career path. That is, that's profound, dude.
It wasn't logic. Definitely wasn't logic. It was fear. I was so terrified. And being numb, my personal belief is that my people, recovering addicts or addicts in active addiction, I feel like we're really obsessed with trying to be able to predict how we feel. And we want to manage that at all costs. And so if a chemical can have a predictable response in terms of how you're going to feel, that's, even if it's actually ruining your life, that's better than like being drug free and living life on life's terms, where you've got the roulette wheel of like emotions, and I got to have a good day, I got to have a bad day, I got to have a good experience, a bad experience. And it just became a way to predict how I feel so I could feel comfortable with my skin. And it cost me everything. Yeah, no,
so to just kind of compare and contrast and kind of give you a little bit of my background as to why I was so interested in doing this. Right. People look at me now as involved in 3 different startups, owning a media brand strategy firm. I'm an ICU nurse that's a clinical instructor. I, got out of the military as a technical sergeant, like all of this other stuff, right? They see the paper, they see the resume, which actually really screws with you, right? When people judge you based off of your resume, that drives me absolutely insane.
Totally.
And I'm sure that you feel that pressure even at a more exponential level, right? And so you have that, but then you go back and you're like, damn, at 14 years old is the first time that I took my dad's JD bottle and then refilled it with water. Mm-hmm. And then I got smart and started refilling it with a mixture of maple syrup and water so that it would stay the same color and not taste super diluted.
Dude, where the hell were you when I was younger? That was brilliant.
Right. So I was like, my dad always used to tell me that I was the ringleader, right? I'm the manipulator. I know how to push every single button in order to get somebody to do something that I want them to do without them knowing it. Right. Which is like an addict's superpower. Yep. I tell people, and I was just in a conversation with a group of people yesterday about how I used to be in CDCA. And I'm like, they're some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. They're just using it in a way that's coined for survival in the streets, not applicable for life in the long run.
Right.
And so I look back at myself at 15, 16, and I was like, man, I'm like, sneaking pills and then dealing them. And I'm like, I've got stuff all in my house, and I'm in high school, and I've got a little ring, of people that I'm, supplementing my 16-year-old income based off of that. And that's awesome. At 16 years old, I'm like, hell yeah, I got tax-free dough. You know, I can smoke a J at Burger King in the behind the dumpster in between shifts. Like, you know, everything's going great. And then I started to get way too familiar with the painkillers.
Yep.
You know, it was like OxyContin, Percocet, Xanax, because I was homeschooled until 8th grade. So when I came to high school,
so you were at shelter too.
Yeah. So, dude, that's why I'm saying when I was reading a whole lot of your stuff, I was like, I have to interview this dude.
It sounds like very similar lives.
Yeah. So I got out of high school, and then I got freshman year of high school. You know, at this point, I'm a 6'1" dashing 230-pound gentleman, but freshman year of high school, I'm a butterball turkey covered in acne with glasses at 5'4" and 240. So I was like the awkward kid. I was a super, super smart, but I was a dick about it because I had no social skills. And the only kids that were willing to try to protect me were the drug addicts. Mm-hmm. Right. And at that point, we didn't know what drug addicts were. They were just the kids that sold you pot underneath the bleachers.
Right.
And so I started getting further and further in with that crew to eventually my crux, right? My breaking point was at 17. I got pulled over on the side of the highway with a truck full of 11 people. And I had booze in the car. I had drugs in the car. I had a whole bunch of other stuff in the vehicle. And by the grace of, I have no idea why to this day, why the cop didn't search the vehicle.
Wow.
But God bitch slapped me into reality.
Yeah.
And my dad, I had to call my dad at 2:00 in the morning to come take possession of a vehicle with 2 police cars behind it and watch as 8 girls, because we went to go pick some girls up for a party, and a couple of dudes got out of the car and drive home, and that was like probably one of the worst nights of my life. Easily.
Did your dad know what was in it?
No, wow. He didn't know until years later when I told him, because that's how much trust I had built up with people. I had manipulated people into believing that I was one of the most trustworthy people in their lives, when in reality, in the background, I was just screwing everything up.
Yep.
So that led to a massive depression stint. About 6 months later, I woke up in a bathtub covered in puke because I had tried to OD. Didn't ever really tell anybody about it. Kind of wore that as a just fear. Didn't want to talk about it.
Sure.
Tried to keep it under wraps. Went to nursing school, got into the military, and then eventually got the courage, thanks to my aunt, to tell my parents. And it's been amazing ever since. Like, I literally will walk up to somebody at this point, shake their hand, and I'll be transparent. I've never actually gone to an NA or AA meeting without being that CDCA counselor, because I always felt like, I had that issue, and it was all of that depressive stuff.
Sure.
And I really, once I dealt with the depression, I have not felt the urge to be numb again.
That's awesome.
I'm one of the lucky ones. I feel like that once I fixed the underlying root of fearing that I was never going to be loved, that I no longer was pursuing the numbness.
Yep.
I'm just full of joy and the ability to tell the story and give back to others. And that's where I really feel like you're coming from when I was reading and listening to a lot of the stuff. So why don't we kind of transition into what really, what it means to you, where you kind of started coming up with Mask Free, and why you believe that being a great leader means leading like a drug addict.
Yeah. So, and I'm grateful that you shared your story. I think sometimes people will look at like what recovery or abstinence looks like and define it pretty narrowly through like a 12-step lens, which is my background, my training. Right. But like, there's a lot of different ways to change your life, and not everybody recovers the same way. It's just you got to find something that works, though. Try and do it just without fixing the underlying issues or working a program doesn't work. So for me, at the end of my rope, I've been kicked out of college. I've been kicked out of school, or kicked out. That's the same thing. Kicked out of college, kicked out of my house, fired from my job. My car had been repossessed. At the age of 23, my liver enzymes were through the roof. I was throwing up blood. My fingernails were stained from nicotine.
Jeez.
And I had nowhere to stay. And the only thing keeping me from living on the street was my buddy's couch, but I was overstaying my welcome. And my parents kept offering to send me to treatment. And eventually, I realized that my friend would probably kick me out. And so I just took it as an alternative. And so just to get 3 meals a day and shelter. So September 1st, 2002. Yeah.
Yep.
September 1st, 2002, I woke up at the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California, and I spent 2 days telling people why I didn't belong there, and I spent the next 26 days understanding why I did.
Yep. I saw that all the time as a CDCA. It's so true.
Well, there's something really powerful. It's one thing to hear your story coming out of 27 other people's mouth. It's another thing when they bring in alumni that say, I've been where you are and I can tell your story, but let me tell you what recovery looks like.
Right.
And I just assumed that I was going to die before my 30th birthday and that was a 28-day vacation. But I've been clean ever since because they taught me, one of the things that I learned was in treatment, they had me create a mask.
Yep.
So, and it's an exercise to show like who do I try to be to the world, and then who am I really? And it showed me how much I was selling myself out as an addict. And the other thing is that a lot of people say stop using, stop using, stop using, stop using. You can't tell an addict to stop. You got to tell them what to start instead.
Right.
Recovery doesn't happen.
Yep.
So they said, okay, work this 12-step process. So I got training 12-step, and you can stay clean, you can stay sober. Yep. And so I get out of treatment and I go, I'm Californian and I want to go, I don't want to, but they tell me I need to do more treatment. So I go to Nashville, Tennessee, do more treatment, end up in a halfway house, have to get a job. And to me, the first moment that I really had to say, what does it mean to be a recovering addict in the real world was when I had to get that job. It was a job interview at Sam Goody.
Yep.
If someone listening is older than me, that's a record store. They're my age, it's a CD store, and if they're in their 20s, they have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about.
Yeah. Hell no. You barely know what a CD is, period.
Yeah. So I had to get a job to stay in the halfway house, or I'll be out on the street. And I had a huge gap in my resume. And basically, I asked my sponsor what to do, and he said, you have to practice the principles in all your affairs. You have to practice recovery here.
Yep.
And so I did, and I told the manager that I was a recovering addict, and that if I didn't get this job, we kicked out of my halfway house. And the reason I had a gap in my history is because I was in rehab and all this stuff. And to this day, I still can't believe it. He gave me the job, and it showed me what surrender really looks like, and it showed me a new way to live. And so how I came up with Mask Free is that started a process for me of then going to work in corporate America at a Fortune 50 company. And the way that I practiced my recovery at work differentiated me from everybody around me. And so one of the things I realized was drug addicts are not the only people out here wearing masks. And, it's because of the pandemic, let me be clear, it's all figurative masks. Like we talk about masks for 17 years and suddenly the pandemic makes it very topical. But I'm talking about, leaders in this world. Like, when was the last time you heard a politician answer a question with, I don't know? Leaders are not vulnerable. They don't own their mistakes. They're scared to share their weaknesses, what they don't know, all that kind of stuff. We think we need to look like we're better than we are. People, if you actually take the time to notice how much energy our brain spends trying to analyze how we're going to manage perception, it is all the time, all day. Whether it's online, in person, doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm in this corporate America setting, but the principles of recovery are not only helping me not use, but they're teaching me how to be what I call a mask-free leader. And the way that I led was very different from the people that were in this Fortune 50 company. For example, most people were like hiding their weaknesses. They would like want to make a graph that was going down, go up. Yep. I was aggressive in sharing mine, right? Like, people were scared to share their unique perspective. I didn't have much to lose, man. I was an addict that should have died. Like, if my boss's boss was in the room, I didn't care. I would still say, this is what I think.
Yo, so, that principle right there, like, I don't mean to kind of like squirrel you, get you off track, but
no, you're good.
I gotta hone in on that. Like, being, I feel like you're at the pulpit, Joel, meaning it right now.
I need someone to shut me up.
But the ability to be aggressively weak.
Yes.
Okay. There's a verse that St. Paul talks about in Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, right? And I'm Catholic, but I'm not a Bible thumper by any means. Yeah. But this one I really, really enjoy, and it has a lot of secular applicability because he talks about a thorn in the flesh, right? This spear that's stuck in his ribs, that's annoying as shit, that won't leave him alone. He keeps asking God to take it away. over and over and over again. And God's like, nah, I'm going to leave it there. And he doesn't understand why. But then he starts preaching to the world about the fact that he has this thorn in his side. And then God says, in your weakness, your strength is made perfect through me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And being aggressively weak to the public and showcasing your flaws and be like, yo, no, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out.
Yeah.
Being willing to just take it. It's one step rather than just trying to. I always will be on the phone and be like, hey, listen, I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass. So give me like an hour and I'll find you the answer. That's so simple. But people are always like, feel the pressure, especially if it's from a superior calling down on them. They're like, oh, yeah, boss, no, I'm doing this. And, or you wake up and your alarm clock didn't go off and your boss calls you and you're on the way to the office and be like, hey, yeah, no, I had a flat tire this morning. And,
right.
Trying to wake it up and be like, oh, shit, no, my alarm's going off, but my dumbass like didn't wake up. I'll be in a little bit. Sometimes that could be scary being that transparent, but.
It can, but one of the reasons that we do that is because the boss has the opposite problem, and that is they have imposter syndrome. So they don't want to admit their weaknesses because they think that they're not worthy of what they have. So they curate their humanity in front of the people that they lead, and then they wonder why their people are spending 22 hours trying to figure out how to use a pivot table when they could have spent 10 minutes asking for help.
Right.
Squandering away the company's resources. And so like when I did that little Fortune 50 thing for 8 years. I became a leader, learned so much. I stuck out like a sore thumb because I was from California. I said, dude, and I had long hair and hoop earrings and flip flops, but it was actually more my recovery. And when I left that company to start my own, I had a moment when we were not going to make it for sure. It was like very scary times where I realized that I was the CEO of a startup. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was like a little kid in an adult suit. And I wanted to tell my team, because we had just gotten on national television exposure, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And I wanted to tell my team that I had no idea how to lead this company and that I needed help. But everything in my head said, that's not what a CEO does. They will disrespect you. They will leave you. They will not work as hard. Do not do that no matter what. My recovery kicked in, and this is what I think mask-free leadership. Mask-free leadership is applying the principles that addicts use to recover to lead yourself in any situation by owning your humanity and actually being able to surrender outcomes and do uncomfortable work. And so in this instance, I went to my team and I did something that they would have never expected. I said, hey, I have no idea how to be a CEO and I need help. Do you have any ideas? And instead of them leaving, they helped me build the company for the next 6 years and help me find help and help me find a mentor. And when you do that, you're not just being vulnerable and being authentic and it being cliche and self-helpy. What you're doing is you're genuinely demonstrating how to lead yourself to the people that you're leading so that they can lead themselves.
Oh yeah. No, I agree 100%. Like I mean, obviously Apex started out in the basement, and I don't know what the hell I was doing. I'm an ICU nurse. Right. So my biggest thing was I used to go to this mastermind group and they're the ones that kind of pushed me into being like starting it as a company. And I was like, well, I'm not a business major, or I wasn't a business major, and then at one point I had a professor that was, and had invited me into the group, look at me and be like, do you own an LLC? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a name registered with the state. And he was like, then you're a fucking CEO. Start acting like one. And I was like, oh, shit. Okay. I guess that means that and it fundamentally shifted my mindset. It was like, I am not the product of this piece of paper. And I'm not a byproduct of this specific portion of my life. Like, I am a collection of all of these different experiences that I can use for positivity. So I want to go back and I want to talk a little bit about the principle of manipulation. Yeah. Because I do think that it's something that people that have had experience with drugs or alcohol, or politicians, yeah, are super good at, right? And manipulation is really fundamentally, my definition of manipulation is being able to look at somebody and within a short period of time have the emotional intelligence and the intellectual capacity to know how to target specific weak points in that person's personality to be able to get them to do things that you want them to do. Like you're flanking them.
Yep.
You know how to come in from the side or come in from the back and be either very charismatic or appeal to their ego or appeal to their career deficit, you know, and boop, 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 boop. And then they do what you want them to do. I was phenomenal at it. Right. And like I said, I was really, really good at getting that done. And I realized when I got into the military that there's two ways that you can apply it. And leadership is nothing but positive manipulation. It's the manipulation of a group of people for positive intention. The minute that it becomes a manipulation of a group of people for personal gain is when it becomes true manipulation.
Sure.
So I'm curious what your thought process is on that and how you've seen it kind of manifest in your life. Is that does that bode with leading mask free, understanding that you have this internal gift and you can use it? It's a double-edged sword. You can either use it for positive or use it for negative. How can somebody figure out, A, if they have that gift, and then B, how to use it mask free?
So I don't know how to necessarily help people identify the gift. I will say that there's an old timer that is like my spiritual mother, and her name is Holly in my recovery group, and she helped teach me how to stay
For those
clean.
of you that aren't in recovery, what's an old timer?
An old timer is someone with there's various debates, but typically 20 years or more, clean or sober.
Just want to give them some context.
Yeah,
I know what that is, but they may not.
Sure. So she, I was telling her about a friend of ours in recovery that was scared that they wouldn't be able to get a job now that they were coming out of jail, and they were clean. And she said, "Shit, man, every addict knows how to sell." Because we had to get money and get those drugs. Like every addict knows how to sell. So don't worry about it. And so I think that one of the best things that I learned in recovery is a human being can take the same action as another human being.
Mm-hmm.
And one can be evil and one can be spiritual and positive, because it all comes down to what your intent was, what your motive was. And so I used to manipulate people, like you just said, to be able to fund my addiction, to get drugs, to whatever. In my early recovery, I would do that to try to get a date with a girl or whatever, or try to win in a business situation. But by the time I was the CEO of an E500 company, what I learned was, and I never had words for it the way that you just said, I knew how to positively manipulate people. So when I was leading my company, I wanted everybody in that company to feel the same level of psychological safety that I felt in my 12-step meetings. I felt safer in a 12-step meeting in the middle of the hood in actually downtown Columbus, Ohio, where I'm the only white face out of 50, than I did in my Fortune 50 job where I knew all the people and they all looked like me, right? So the psychological safety that I could achieve in recovery, I wanted in my company. But what I noticed was everybody that I hired had been trained to operate in a different way, to cover their weaknesses, to manipulate other people, to be scared of leadership. So I wanted them to act the way that I was acting, with complete and total vulnerability. So one of the things that I did that I would now label a positive manipulation is, I realized, Simon Sinek says leaders eat last. Well, fuck that. Authentic leaders go first. And so I would go to my team, and once a week, I would tell them, more or less once a week, I would tell them the biggest, baddest weakness or difficulty that I was working through where I didn't have a positive story. And that set the tone, because it made it safe for them to do the same. And that was an explicit action that I was taking, because you know where I learned that? A sponsor, man. A sponsor in recovery did that. They didn't sit here and say, I got all my stuff down. I know how to do all this. They said, you know what? I'm an act just like you. I make mistakes just like you. And I'm going to tell you all the mistakes I made and how I use this thing called 12 steps to recover. And they inspire and lead through their vulnerability, through their imperfections, through their mistakes, and sharing their experience completely and totally. Whereas leaders curate what they share. Sometimes they understand they need to be authentic, and they say, oh, I struggled once back then, or whatever, or I have this problem, but I'm figuring it out. But a truly great leader says, I'm in the middle of the shit right now. I have no idea how the story ends, and walk with me and watch what I do, and we'll fucking find out together. That is real. And I had
down in the mud
to make them
know that you're in the arena.
Yeah, so that's an example. I would never have those words for it, but that's an example of where I was able to take that skill set and use it for good. And that's really what the mastery program is about. Like there are things that we do to rewire how you think about the reward centers in your brain so that it gets you to take actions that otherwise you wouldn't. So, and I'll stop talking about this, but like really simple example is one of the things that we help people with is most people hold back their unique perspective online in meetings or whatever. And so one of the things that we do in the mastery program is we give them a goal of collecting haters.
Right.
Because when you collect a hater, if someone on one of my YouTube videos, I hope it wasn't you, said that I was a sociopath. So, and if I am, I probably wouldn't be able to admit it. So I don't know.
Right.
But if I had gotten that comment just in a vacuum, I would have been scared, hurt, angry, and want to reply, and would suck much of my energy. But I had created a mask-free action card where my job that month was to collect at least one hater. And so when I got that comment, it actually gave me a feeling of accomplishment and success. And I gave it no energy. And it's just a positive manipulation of how I perceive the world so that I can be a more authentic human.
Yep. It's all about that lens. Yep. It's all about the lens. Now, like, so do you know who Jocko Willink is? Have you ever heard that name? Okay. So, I mean, I'm, Air Force dude. So I have a buddy that's a Navy SEAL. He introduced me to extreme ownership and the dichotomy of leadership. And one of my favorite words is dichotomy, right? Yep. Or dichotomous, because there's always an alternate angle to look at things. And that's something that I try to advocate for when I'm talking about reaching your apex or doing the apex factor thinking or treating your company as if it's a living organism that you have to nurture, you have to give it hydration, you have to give it protein, all of these different types of substances you have to do. When you're in that place that you said like the true leader goes first, right? And you're blatantly transparent with your team and you're like, yo, so we have this deal coming up. What? I don't know what to do.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And just being straight up, there's so many times that I've had my squad right here with this whiteboard at 1 o'clock in the morning because I'm sitting there WTFing everything under the sun. And then I call my team and we sit down. I'm like, hey guys, so I got this lead. It's big. I have no idea how to do it. Let's figure it out. And then we came up with a plan to where I just live streamed a conference in 7 countries this past weekend that I would have never been able to pull off if I hadn't talked to my buddy that, is my content specialist that happens to know a guy in subcontracting video because I was willing to admit that I had no idea what the fuck to do.
Right. You expose yourself literally to a universe of options that can help you.
Yeah.
And no one knows that more than an addict that asks for help because like for me, for the longest time, I just assumed I was going to die using. It wasn't until I was open about my problem and then solutions presented themselves. And I was like, by the time I was leading my own company, I'm like, why the hell aren't more people doing this? Like what you just described, how many CEOs or executives in large companies are going to their team and saying, hey, I have no idea what to do here. Without any additional prefacing to manipulate the way it is. Like, so for example, I had an executive in our program that was like, I'm authentic with my team. I'm like, okay, tell me what you did. He's like, it doesn't work. I'm like, tell me what you did. He said, I went to them. I knew that I was having trouble in communicating with them and building relationships with them. And I knew that they thought that I was abrasive. So I went to them and I said, hey, I know that sometimes I can be abrasive, but I just really value efficiency. I like to get down to the root of the problem and I want to be helpful. He's like, so I was being authentic. I was like, no, you weren't, because the leader has to set the tone. He's like, well, what should I have done? I was like, you should have gone up to them and said, I fucking suck at relationships.
Straight up.
Period. Done. Nothing to try to manipulate it so you look better.
Yep.
Like, stop doing that. You wonder, whether you're in a company of 20 people or 20,000, most companies develop systems to try to detect bullshit. And what they don't realize is the way that people are leading are generating the value of creating bullshit. Because when you do that and you say, I just like to get down to the facts, and you are now trying to subtly, positively spin it so you still look good in front of the person that you're supposed to lead. And then you wonder why they subtly spin the problem they're having in their territory or the problem or whatever, and they're holding something back from you. You're like, why the fuck are they doing this? Well, you were in power, man, and you did.
Right, exactly, yeah. You're like the parent. That's why we say you have to treat it like it's a living organism. Like, and your employees are children. at first, when I first started saying that, people were like, my employees aren't kids. Like, well, but you have to look at them as if they're children. Children do what? They absorb, when you stop at a stoplight or you're like road raging and next thing you know, your 3-year-old is saying shit in the passenger seat. It's because they're listening.
Yes.
And they're absorbing.
I'm
and
unfortunately
whether
learned
you
that.
believe it or not, they're going to pick up on it, right? Did you say that you've learned that?
I'm unfortunately learning that right now, yes. My daughter is 19 months old, and suddenly, like, I used to have margin where I could, like, say something, and my wife would be like, hey, and I'm like, oh, okay. Because, I mean, I cuss a lot because I'm around addicts a lot, but I also value not doing that in front of her. But now, like, anything I say, she repeats back. I'm like, oh, man. I was, like, okay, this is really embarrassing. I was singing Backstreet Boys.
Dude, I'm more of an NSYNC guy. But.
Well, no, we like both in our house, but she was, it was bath time, and I was like saying, oh my God, we're back again. It was like, wash your body right instead of heading out. And then all of a sudden, my wife values her saying gosh or goodness instead of God. And all of a sudden, she's just saying God, 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 God. And I'm like, oh my God, I was just singing Backstreet Boys, dude. Like, what the hell?
Oh my gosh.
So
that's hilarious. Well, and so when you have those moments though, when you're like, you have that realization, like God, 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 right? And then, or you're the CEO in the company, and rather than being, I always say you have to be a mirror for positivity and a black sheet for negativity, right? Because a mirror reflects positivity back upon the team, right? And as a black sheet, black just absorbs all light, right? So you have to absorb that hit. You cannot go to your team and be like, you suck, straight up. You can tactfully, that's where you have to be strategic and you have to manipulate the team.
Yeah,
right?
That's pretty performance management. Just being an a-hole, there's no reason for that.
Yeah, there's no reason to be like, what the hell? And like smacking their computer off the desk, figuratively or literally, if you're that big of a dick, and then trying to get them motivated that way. That's not going to work. But if you can say, hey, you guys did a good job, high five on this job, and then something bad happens, you're like, listen, that was on me. And that's more of the extreme ownership principles, right? Is like, that was on me. What can I do to help you be prepared for the next time that we encounter this?
Right.
What did I not explain easy enough? And even if it's that, just blatantly saying, yo guys, this was our first run at it. I had just as little information as you guys did. I was just trying to figure it out just as much as you are. We failed at it. Here's what I'm going to do to try to make sure that I can play my part better next time. And then asking them to do the same thing. Is way different than just pointing out all of their errors and telling them to fix their shit and then not being willing to do a debrief analysis on yourself.
If you performance manage yourself in front of your team, you really have to performance manage them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So let's start to dig into these moments that you've had, right? And one of the moments that you have that really kind of blew my mind was the first time that you had an authentic share at a meeting. And I want you to hit on that because I really think before we get into practicing rigorous authenticity, surrendering the outcome, and doing the uncomfortable work to wrap everything up, and we talk about the book, that is what I want to use to set the tone for how impactful it can really be to just be blatantly honest and live mask-free.
Yeah, so for the first 6 months out in the real world, in my recovery, I would go to 12-step meetings almost every day. And I had not stopped wanting to impress people. So now I'm in a room with a bunch of addicts and I want to like impress them with my shares. So, because for those of you guys who don't know, but movies made it very popular, but like what we do in those meetings, we typically share. And so when people would share a really good story where it'd be really emotional or really funny, people would like, you could actually see everybody's response, like almost like an audience, right? And so I wanted that positive reinforcement. I wanted to share to impress everybody.
It's like a post with a bunch of likes on it.
Yeah, exactly. And I never would have thought I'd be in a small room in a church somewhere with a bunch of people in a 12-step program in Nashville, Tennessee, trying to impress them. But that's where I found myself. And one of the things I did was I tried to like literally script what I was going to say. And I tried to hide anything that I thought would be a bad share or not interesting. So by that process, I started to filter out my real moments. And then one day I walked in there and I just had the worst day and I wanted to use. And I knew that if I didn't like actually share for real, that I would most likely probably go out of there and use. And so I shared, I got emotional, I was vulnerable, I was all over the place. It was not funny, it was not impactful, it was not anything. And after the meeting, I was trying to get out of there because I felt really embarrassed. And there was an old timer named Tim, who was like this really rough, like Harley Davidson biker dude. And he had like, you know, goatee and all Harley gear on. And everybody was like intimidated and loved him. And he grabbed me, and I thought he was about to like dress me down for what I shared, because that's what I expected from the world. And he said, "Hey, Mike, I just want you to know that that was the best share you've ever done."
Hell yeah.
I was like, "What are you talking about, dude? That was the worst share I've ever done."
Right.
He's like, "No, that's the first real share that you've ever done." And he explains to me that the only way I'm going to stay clean, the only way I'm going to live, is if I show my true, authentic self.
Yep.
And he says something to the extent of, "I want to get to know that guy." And I've told the story a lot of times. I'm still getting chills right now just talking about it, because it was the first time anyone had ever told me that I would die if I wasn't authentic, and that they wanted to get to know the real me right after I thought I'd showed my ass to someone who I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And that completely rearranged my value system. Like in that moment. I mean, I had to do other things to reinforce it and learn, and I made mistakes and all that stuff, but it was the opposite of what I expected. And it just I obviously carry that with me 17 years later. It was mind blowing. Yeah,
you're about to make it to the point where you're gonna be an old timer.
I know, I'm getting close.
I was talking, and it's curious to me that the way that you phrase that, right? You said, it wasn't funny, it wasn't impactful, which is bullshit.
Right. I know that now.
Right. And you know that now, but like,
I can see myself. I can see the guy like trying to do the TED talk in the meeting. And I'm like, fuck that guy. And then I see the person that it's real. I'm like, because I'm trying to be Tim now, because I want them to know. I have a sponsee who's like the traditional Southern male bravado dude, like,
right,
gotta impress everybody. And you know what? One time in a meeting, he was crying. He was losing a family member, and he showed a level of vulnerability that no dude with his upbringing would ever allow himself to do.
Hell yeah.
And I pulled him aside afterwards. I was like, I think you are stronger, and I respect you more. And I actually love you and want to get to know you now. Before I thought you were an asshole and an idiot. And now I actually want to get to know you.
Yeah. So there's a, I'm a huge follower of like Aurelian philosophy and stoicism. And I love reading Socrates. I'm a huge big guy into Alan Watts and Jordan Peterson, and like all of these people that really just challenge. The way that I like to end my evenings is with a nice existential crisis before bed.
Can you do that consistently every night?
Yeah, maybe once a week. I feel like if I tried to do that every night, I would just be like, hair would be pulling out everywhere, and I'd be Einsteining it over here trying to just be a philosopher. But, those schools of thought, right, where you have kind of the ego, the superego, the id, the Freudian sides, and you have all these different ways of analyzing the different layers of the subconscious and conscious minds. When you are vulnerable, it is both the weakest and the most powerful you're ever going to be in your life at the exact same time. And the way that I kind of explain that barbell, right, is that vulnerability is like the gap, the piece that holds together these two massive weights of weakness and power. Vulnerability is what connects the two and makes it just a nice 45-pound dumbbell, because they're both equally as powerful. Right. Okay. That works for me. But the actually right now after coronavirus, dude, I might be pulling 15s before I get back in there. But you have that vulnerability allows you to connect it. It transfers the weakness into power.
Yeah. And the thing is that it's not, one of the things I get frustrated by, and one of the reasons I wrote my book was I was really inspired by Brene Brown's work. And she's like an incredible thought leader on vulnerability and authenticity. But there's a lot of new help or new agey or self-help people that talk about the power of vulnerability and authenticity. But to me, a lot of times people will look at that as, oh, well, that's just like a cop-out, and you're just trying to feel good about being weak or whatever. And so I really got obsessed with attempting to, which I have now, proven that this stuff is actually in a concrete way a competitive advantage in the most brutal arena, which is the professional one, when it comes to authenticity. And I think that one of the things I noticed was people, until they understand why that makes you strong, they a lot of times just say, oh, well, you're just trying to be self-help. And so here's the deal. If you are a leader of other people and you try to deny your humanity in front of other people, you cut off connection.
Right.
And without connection, your ability to lead becomes compromised unless you have a structure that gives you a tremendous amount of power. And so up until 25 years ago, we had centralized decision-making in the corporate world because we were in a manufacturing economy. We have generals on the battlefield, command and control leadership. It works in that model. But now that we're in a services economy, what you see companies doing is leadership is trying to make the front lines, the people actually solving problems for other humans through software or service. They're trying to make it so that they're able to make decisions and solve problems there. And so the only way that they can connect with and inspire those people is by bringing down this armor and not trying to pretend that they're not a human. Because in a services economy, the number one thing that matters is connection in a time when we have like a tenth of the connection that we had. If you can't connect with your people, they're not going to be effective at connecting with each other and with the customer. And like I said, 25 years ago in a manufacturing economy, a bunch of people are in a plant, they create a widget, it's on the shelf, it's an impersonal transaction, you can have an impersonal culture. But now that we're in a services economy, you have to have that connection. And so the leaders that are hiding their humanity, like screw all the self-help stuff, man. If you want to get a better P&L, like fucking show who you truly are and stop pretending that you don't have to lead yourself through some shit, because we all do.
Yeah, no, exactly. The people that, I mean, my brain is going a billion miles an hour because there's like 1,500 different things that I could bring up right now to reinforce every single one of those facts. Because to be blatantly honest, right, I accept the fact that I'm a fucking child in the corporate world, right? I'm 25 years old.
Right.
So I'm just starting to get my toes wet in this space, especially because, I mean, I've led in the military, I've led in the hospital, but leading a company is a completely different ballgame. And doing stuff like this, though, is what I'm really passionate about, is telling other people's stories and making other people's dreams come true. And when you're in that services industry and you have that delegatory leadership, empowering people to be transparently honest and be upfront with your clients and form that relationship with your clients, there's actually a psychological principle, right, that is based on establishing or trying to mitigate predispositions. And you have the ability to go in, and everybody always says, like, you have to be a positive impression within 7 seconds. Otherwise, they're going to think you're a dick for the rest of your life. It's like, no, that's not the case. You go in and you might have like a firm handshake and eye contact, and you can have your shoulders back and your chin up and whatever else. But if you go in there and that's not you, they're going to think you're a dick. Yeah. So I go in, right now I'm wearing a XXL t-shirt and joggers in the office, right? Because this is what I felt like wearing to the office today because I'm chilling. And if I have a meeting to go to and somebody else tells me that I need to like dress up because it's a massive function and it's their event and they've put a ton of work into it, and I'll wear a suit. I won't like it.
Yeah.
But I'll wear it out of respect for them. Yes. But if there's a meeting that I call and I may be having the deputy mayor come in, or a city council member is coming to stop by, or, I'm talking to a CEO or something, I'm in boots, jeans, and a flannel, or boots, jeans, and a polo. You come in and it cracks me up because my co-founder, he's like an Italian background. He loves wearing suits constantly. So we'll go in and we'll like do initial pitches and stuff. And everybody is sitting there waiting for the presentation to start. And they look at Jacob as if he's going to stand up and start talking. And then the bum, in the belt buckle stands up and with the jeans on and like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Jan Almasy. I'm the, director of relations is what I'm saying. And for Apex Communications Network. And they're like, what the shit? Who's letting this guy give the pitch?
Yeah. Like, they swap outfits in the elevator.
Yeah. And so, but it gives me the freedom to just be me. And it gives these principles give people the ability to lead with power while eliminating all the mental stress of having to be anybody but themselves. because you only have a certain amount of brain power to use during the day.
Right.
And if you eliminate all of the brain power that's dedicated to fronting, you'd be surprised how much more brain equity you have to focus on shit that actually matters.
Print that. That's real.
So
yeah,
I'm going to get off my pulpit and let you kind of wrap up with this Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts book. And let's talk about this practicing rigorous authenticity, surrendering the outcome, and doing uncomfortable work.
Yeah, dude. So here's how my book's set up. So I read all Brene Brown's stuff. I got all excited about authenticity. Then I gave my team all of her stuff, and they couldn't implement it because they didn't have the background that I had as a recovering addict. And what I realized was, as a recovering addict, I'd actually learned a system for how to lead yourself and be an authentic leader. So the first chapter in the book is I'm Mike, I'm an addict, and it's me demonstrating what addiction looks like. The second chapter is the intervention for the reader, and it's where I actually say that you're so-and-so and you're a mask addict. And my argument is the reason we don't have authentic leaders is we haven't diagnosed the problem. The problem is that they are addicted to wearing a mask, not that they are choosing to. And when you tell someone who's addicted to something to stop, they don't stop. So we keep saying, stop being inauthentic, stop being inauthentic, stop being inauthentic, instead of treating the fucking problem.
Right.
So I then, in chapter 3, I talk about why in the last 25 years, the economy has changed in such a way that being a mask-free leader will make you reclaim 500 hours a year and be far more successful. And I talk about the 4 masks that people are wearing in work anywhere today. It's the mask of saying yes when you could say no, the mask of hiding a weakness, the mask of avoiding a difficult conversation, and the mask of holding back your unique perspective. Everybody can relate to doing one or all of those things, and it's costing them 500 hours a year. So then what I do is I essentially take them to mask rehab. And in the next 3 chapters, I teach them the principles that I learned in recovery. So these are the 3 principles. Practice rigorous authenticity. Anybody can talk about that time they kept it real in front of grandma. That's great. That's selective authenticity. I'm talking about rigorous, being authentic every time. The way that you do that is you identify which of these 4 masks you're wearing in any given situation.
Right.
The second principle is surrender the outcome. Once you've identified the mask, what's keeping you on your face, you're scared of what people will think. You're scared of what's going to happen to your job or to the customer or to whatever if you take off your mask and you share your vulnerability or you say no or you share your unique perspective. And so surrendering the outcome is something that they do not teach leaders, but they do teach addicts.
Right.
Leaders are obsessed with outcomes. They spend so much time wasting time and energy on things they can't control at the expense of the things that they can. And addicts are really great at surrendering the things that they can't control and focusing on what they can once they're in recovery. Right. So if you can surrender the outcome, identify what you can't control and let go of it, suddenly you reclaim so much energy. And that's what allows you to do what addicts in recovery have to do, which is a shit ton of uncomfortable work. And when I'm going and I'm talking to companies, like work with companies like Google and Dell and all that stuff, like leaders will be like, I know how to do uncomfortable work. I'll be like, no, you don't. You know how to do smart work and hard work. That's physical and intellectual.
Yep.
Uncomfortable work is emotional. It's a sensation in your body that deters you from taking action that is good for you. We've all seen someone doing 8 hours of uncomfortable work, or of hard work because they're avoiding 10 minutes of uncomfortable work. And so basically these 3 principles are you identify the mask, you surrender whatever you're worried about so you reclaim energy, and then you identify the uncomfortable work of being the mask-free leader. And what I do in the book is I take them through a step-by-step process that's just like the 12 steps, where they can actually take these principles and implement them into what we call a 28-day mask-free action card, where they read it 1 minute a day, and it will make them start to live and lead mask-free. It'll make them start to say no, start to share their weaknesses, start to have those difficult conversations, and start sharing their unique perspective. And then there's an implementation plan, and then I end the book. There's a couple other things in there. I talk about a mask-free sponsor, a mask-free society, and why they're so important. And so that's why I'm building that right now. We have 500 people in the mask-free program. We have a meeting every Monday night where we meet. And I end the book with what I thought was cool, because most people in a self-help or like leadership book, it ends with like, I climbed Mount Everest and you can too. So I wanted to end it with when I threw everything that I teach the reader out the window. And so the last chapter is called A Tale of Two Divorces, and it's about the year that I relapsed in my mask addiction, not my drug addiction, but my mask addiction. I started wearing masks, and it cost me my wife, my business partner, and the business. I had to sell the business that I want to build the rest of my life, all in 1 year, just because I've been wearing those masks. So that's what the book is. It's Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts. You can get it at greatleaderbook.com. I'm also putting out a ton of mass-free content, but like my goal is, this is about purpose, not profit, is to create 1 million mask-free leaders. If we can create 1 million mask-free leaders, people that are practicing rigorous authenticity, surrendering the outcome, and doing uncomfortable work, we literally will create a mask-free world.
Wow. That's some profound shit, man. That is like, the amount of, I say blissful serendipity is what I call it, right? Blissful serendipity to me is when things in your life start to line up in ways that you could not have anticipated, just because timing and God knows like what you need in the long run versus what you need in the short term and everything else. Because we were supposed to have this interview back in June, I think. And then I fucked up, pardon my French, again, whatever at this point. But, you know, we had to reschedule it. And I don't remember if it was because of COVID or I got, off track, whatever. Brooke had to reschedule the interview for now. And the whole reason why I think that she had to do that from then until now is that there were, things that I've done business-wise that you're talking about right now over from that period from June till now that are making me really understand the in-depth, rooted benefits of going through a 28-day habitual reset to teach yourself how to be completely mask-free and just being completely transparent and allowing yourself to understand that your biggest weaknesses, they can be your biggest strengths if you lead like a drug addict.
Yep.
And that's what I'll leave our listeners with today. And like I said, I have the book on the way. I haven't read it yet, but I didn't want to read it before I interviewed you. There's a lot of people that I know that do interviews that read stuff or they try to read the author's book prior to interviewing the author. And I don't like doing that because as a nurse, I think one of the biggest things that I learned is active listening is everything.
Yeah.
And so if I were to read the book prior to interviewing you, I would know all of your answers, or I would be able to anticipate what direction you were trying to take shit. And it would be inauthentic, right? I would be inside of my head because the way my brain works is once you plug in a data input, it's just going the entire time. And so this is beyond what I expected the interview to actually be because of the almost eerily similar timeline early in life that kind of led to the same types of realizations in different contexts, right? I always tell people the only reason why I'm at where I'm at 25 is because I hit my shitstorm at 17.
Right.
Some people don't hit their shitstorm until they're in their mid 20s.
Yeah.
And then it grows from there. So I'm like, at this point, I've been on that path since I was 17 years old on the side of a highway. And for those of you that are in a place where you're at a rock bottom or you're in the audience and you're listening to this right now, wondering how the hell am I going to survive tomorrow or tonight? There are plenty of resources here in Stark County, all over the world. You can call a bunch of different lines. You could probably reach out to me or Mike at this point. Trying to take a message from you for sure and talk to you, whether it's suicide or it's a potential relapse or it's whatever you've got, whatever kind of shit you got going on. There are people out there that care about you and you have something to add to this world because trust me when I say when I was in that place where I couldn't stand to do anything except for pop a pill to try to make myself feel numb, I didn't believe I was worth anything. And I'm here now waking up excited as hell to go to work and going to sleep excited as hell to get 2 hours of sleep to get back up and go to work again. Because that's the phase of life that I'm in. But I would have never made it here if I hadn't taken the time to be vulnerable and turn that weakness into power.
Yeah,
so that is my end there. I appreciate you for sure.
You too, man.
The time to come on. And for everybody out there listening, go ahead and check out his book. It is right down there. I always mess up the camera. Greatleaderbook.com. All right. It looks like that over there, whoop, in that corner. And you definitely won't regret it. All right. We'll catch you on the flip side, guys.
Thanks, guys.